Good morning. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Activate Her with me, Sally Goodwin, and to this episode of Start Your Week with Sally. Welcome, everybody. Good morning, good morning, good morning. I think I've mentioned it before, but when you go live, it says you're going live and then it starts the clock and then I say good morning, welcome, and then it kind of says now you live and goes back to the beginning again. And so I'm never sure how many good mornings and welcomes are actually coming across. But apologies if I'm saying a million good mornings and a million welcomes. But it is so good to be with you here this morning on Activate Her with me, Sally Goodwin, and start your week with Sally. It is a Monday, a beautiful Monday in Cape Town, South Africa. Good morning, jubilant Jolene. Good morning, wonderful Volna. Lovely to see you on this Monday. I hope you all had wonderful weekends. Good morning, beautiful Bertha. I hope you're feeling better, my friend, and that you are on the road to recovery and feeling strong again. Good morning, Radiant Renee. Lovely to see you this morning. So good to see all of you on this morning, this Monday morning. Good morning, Special Sonia. Good morning, Joyful Jane. Good morning, Helette, my beautiful friend. Welcome, welcome. The names are going up so quickly now that I'm worried that I'm missing them. But welcome, everybody, to Activate Her, to start your week. Good morning, famous Chantel. Welcome, my beautiful friend. Can you believe it? This is the week that we start the prophetic school. This week, Thursday, we start the prophetic school. Super, super, super excited. Good morning, magnificent Michelle. Good morning, amazing Evren. It's so good to have you on the live again, my lovely. Welcome. I'm trusting you all had good morning, Conrad. Lovely to see you, my friend. So good to see you. Trusting that you all had fantastic weekends and you were blessed and abundantly favored. Good morning, heroic Hilda. Wonderful to see you. And that those of you who have signed up, good morning, tremendous Tishka. Those of you who have signed up for the prophetic school, that you are super excited and praying into it. And come on, Michelle's. I'm so excited that you've registered. Yes. Welcome, welcome. I'm so glad you're going to be there. Good morning, beautiful Brigitte. And I trust that you're praying into it and that you are asking God, good morning, Ethne, my lovely, and that you are asking God or laying your expectations before the Lord, because that is very important. Good morning, Tilly. Good morning, Roz. Welcome, welcome. Sorry, sometimes the names shoot up so quickly that I can't see them all. But I hope that you are putting your expectations before the Lord. You need to come to the prophetic school knowing, not knowing, but with expectation. That's what I'm trying to say. You need to come to the prophetic school with expectation. Don't just come kind of, okay, well, whatever happens and whatever I get. You've joined up, you've signed up, you've registered for the prophetic school for a reason. And whatever that reason might be, however big or small you feel your reason is, there must be, good morning, Special Sylvia. There must be, you must have some kind of expectation as to what it is that you are wanting God to do in you and through this prophetic school. And so my advanced homework for you before Thursday, if you have signed up for the prophetic school, is to think through or pray through just some expectations that you have from the prophetic school. What is it that you're looking for? What is it that you're expecting God to do? and then lay those expectations before the Lord. Write them down. Sometimes we need to write things down so that, and not because God knows what we want, but He wants us to know. Good morning, Devon. Welcome, my friend. So good to see you on the live this morning. Sending so much love to Caleb and Sebastian. Good morning, joyful Jackie. Welcome, welcome. Yes, welcome to this community, all of you. Welcome to this church without walls. Delightful Delette, welcome. So good to have you on. Danette, sorry, I think I said Delette. I got my alliteration, got all confused. Delightful Danette, welcome. Good morning, beautiful Rose. Lovely to see you, my gorgeous friend. Such a treat to have you on the live. So please come with expectation on Thursday evening. Know what your expectations are. Put them before the Lord, and because it's always good to have an expectation, to know what you're looking for, to what you're asking God to bring you through this prophetic school. And then those of you who have messaged me to say that you would be interested in the online school, in the Zoom school. Good morning, Claudia. Please, I was considering doing that on a Tuesday night, but there is one person who can't make it on a Tuesday night who can make it on a Wednesday night. So please let me know if there's any night that would be better for you. Good morning, Renil Way. Lovely to see you, my friend. Good morning, amazing Anisha. I was going to do it. Good morning, Elsabe. Lovely to see you this morning. I was going to do the Zoom, the online school on a Tuesday evening, and then somebody mentioned, morning special, Sylvia. And then somebody messaged me and said they can't do Tuesday evenings, they can only do they can do Wednesday evenings. And so I'm considering a Wednesday evening. Oh my word, Devon. Caleb started crawling and he's pulling himself upright. He is growing fast and furiously. That is amazing. I can't wait to see him again. I can't wait to see him again. I have the absolute privilege, ladies and gentlemen, of being Caleb's godmother. So, which is something that gorgeous Jen asked me before she stepped into eternity to be with Jesus. And so we are going to be having a dedication ceremony soon, and I'm going to officially become Caleb's godmother, which I'm so super excited about and just so blessed. So I have a little piece of my beautiful Jen in my life forever. So yes, so the in-person prophetic school will be on a Thursday evening, every second Thursday evening, and the Zoom prophetic school will be also every second week, but either on a Tuesday or a Wednesday. So please, if you've messaged me to say you're interested in the online school, let me know which evening works best for you, and we're going to go with a majority rules in this instance, because it's very difficult to please everybody, obviously, which is always the case here. But I'm super excited for Thursday, and yes, and I hope that you all are super excited, and yeah, just I'm excited for what God is going to do, because it feels for me that He is going to show off, that He is going to go above and beyond and do things that are beyond our wildest dreams and expectations. Good morning, Estrelita. So this morning, today is the 26th of February 2024, and it is the 17th of Adar 5784. But what is so significant about the 26th of February 2024? Good morning, Stu. What is so significant about the 26th of February 2024 is that in the Orthodox churches, oh yes, thank you for reminding me, my friend. Please like and share these messages so that other people can hear the word of the Lord, be a part of this church without walls, be a part of this incredible family and community, because it's such a special place to be. But the Orthodox churches on the 26th of February 2024 have what they call the feast day of Saint Photini. Um, and Saint Photini is apparently the name for the Samaritan woman at the well. So in the Orthodox churches on the 26th of February, they actually, which is today, they celebrate the woman at the well. They have a feast day which is dedicated to the woman at the well. They call her Saint Photini. I'm not sure where they got the name from, but it is actually a day, a feast day dedicated to the woman at the well. And when you look at the enormously significant part that the woman at the well played, which we're going to go into over these next, I'm thinking it'll probably take us a couple of sessions, you can understand why Orthodox churches have a whole feast day dedicated to her. And I think that in a way, that is something where the more sort of evangelical, Pentecostal, charismatic, revival culture, however you want to name them, churches uh, have fallen down a little bit. Not that we need days dedicated to specific people in the Bible, I'm not saying that, but in their recognition of some of the women who played an enormous part in biblical times. The Orthodox churches much more open to actually celebrating the women who played significant roles in biblical times, much more open to that, much more open to recognizing what these women did in biblical times, which is something that the more evangelical, charismatic, whatever churches are just, they just don't do. It's just not something. I mean, I've heard lots of messages preached on the woman at the well, but not specifically based on her as a person and what her function and her role was in this story that we read about in the Gospels. Good morning, lovely Louise. The story that we read about in the Gospels, and that seems significant in terms of, we always hear these messages around how she'd been married 5 times and she was living with someone who wasn't her husband, and so Jesus forgave her, and we've always focused on the living water and all of that comes out of that story, which are enormously important, but there are layers and layers and layers to the story that we miss because we've read it a certain way for so long, we've heard it preached a certain way for so long, we have looked at the woman at the well through a certain lens for so long, through a certain perspective for so long, and today is the day, not just today, but probably today and Wednesday and possibly Friday, where we are going to look at the woman at the well in a very different light. Good morning, Julie. Welcome, my lovely. So the story of the woman at the well, we can read in John chapter 4, and we can start from the beginning. It says, "Now when the Lord knew that the Pharisees had been told that Jesus was winning and baptizing more disciples than John, though Jesus himself did not baptize, but his disciples, he left Judea and returned to Galilee." So we are in John chapter 4, and the Pharisees have found out that Jesus is winning disciples more so than John ever even did, and he knows that they are not happy about that, and so he leaves Judea and he returns to Galilee. And the Amplified Bible says it was necessary for him to go through Samaria. Now, what you need to understand is that to get from Judea to Galilee, for example, to go through Samaria was the shortest route. But the Samaritans and the Jews had nothing to do with each other. They had nothing to do with each other. The Jewish people regarded the Samaritans as inferior, as the Jewish people believed that God should be worshipped in one place. The Samaritans believed that God should be worshipped in a different place. And there was absolute division between the two peoples, between the Jews and the Samaritans. And the Jewish people had such a dim view of the Samaritans that they would walk a longer route to avoid having to go through Samaria. not all of the Jewish people, the less Orthodox Jews, the less, the Jews who were less concerned with all of that, didn't necessarily have such an issue with it. But the Orthodox Jews, the religious Jews, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, all of those sorts of people. Sorry, let me just get my water. My voice is a bit croaky. They would rather walk. It was something like, I forget the exact amount, so don't quote me on this, but it's something like 65 kilometers extra or something like that. It was something ridiculous. Maybe not 65. I don't know why 65 is in my head, but it was something ridiculous, like that they would walk to go around Samaria rather than have to walk through it. That's how they viewed and any religious, law-abiding Jew, they weren't allowed to mix. The Jewish people weren't supposed to mix with foreigners. They weren't supposed to have anything to do with foreigners. They weren't supposed to, even when it came to people like the Samaritans, they wouldn't share utensils. They wouldn't share anything. They wouldn't use the same bowls or cups, or that was how much they despised the Samaritans. But that is how the Jewish people were with foreigners. They kept themselves to themselves, and they didn't share anything with anybody, which is again why the parable of the Good Samaritan is so impactful, because if you lived in the ancient Middle East in those times and you knew the rules that the Jewish people followed and how they would have nothing to do with the Samaritans particularly, but foreigners generally, but the Samaritans particularly, you would know how the parable of the Good Samaritan was so powerful. And the Samaritans hated the Jewish people equally, because the Jewish people despised them so much, because they were treated like they were less than, they were inferior, they were these, the hatred was equally spread between the Jews and the Samaritans. So the fact that Jesus, who was a law-abiding Jew in terms of he followed the laws, he preached in the synagogue, in the temple, he abided by the feasts and all of that kind of thing. He was, for all intents and purposes, a law-abiding Jewish man. But it says in verse 4 in the Amplified, it was necessary for him to go through Samaria. If you read in the scriptures, it says he had to pass through Samaria. And if you read in the New King James Version, it says, but he needed to go through Samaria. And so there are many scholars and theologians who believe that he had to go through Samaria, that it was the Holy Spirit that encouraged him to go through Samaria because he was going to meet up with the woman at the well. But there was so much more to it than just that. So much more to it than just that. So it says, so he came to, sorry, I've just lost my place. So it says it was necessary for him to go through Samaria. Morning, Tamsin. And in doing so, John chapter 4, verse 5, in doing so, he arrived at a Samaritan town called Sychar, near the tract of land that Jacob gave to his son Joseph. And Jacob's well was there. So Jesus, tired as he was from his journey, sat down to rest by the well. It was then about the 6th hour, about noon. Now, we often just read that and we kind of go through that, and we don't specifically pay attention to the places that the place that Jesus was in, because we get consumed by the story. But I want you to pay attention to that. He arrived at a Samaritan town called Sychar, near the tract of land that Jacob gave to his son Joseph, and Jacob's well was there. Now Sychar, the Samaritan town of Sychar, was in an area or near a place called Shechem. And for those of you who've read the Old Testament, you will have heard of Shechem. So I want to just speak about the different things that had taken place in this space where Jesus stopped, so that you will understand the full ramifications of why Jesus needed to go through Samaria and stop in the town of Sychar, in the area associated with Shechem, to meet the woman at the well. So firstly, Abraham built the first of 7 altars to God there in that area. Abraham built the first of 7 altars to God in that area. This is how steeped in history, in Israelite history, that area was. Abraham built the first of 7 altars to God there. That was where Jacob, and it mentions that in the text, Jacob dug a well at Sychar, and that was also where Jacob buried his household gods, which means that that was a space where Jacob reaffirmed his covenant to the Lord. So Abraham built the first of 7 altars to God there. That is covenant. Jacob dug a well there and buried his household gods there. He reaffirmed covenant to the Lord twice. Joseph ordered his bones to be buried there. You can go and look all this up in the Old Testament. Joseph ordered his bones to be buried there. Joshua ratified covenant with God twice in the mountains above Shechem. Joshua ratified his covenant, the Israelites' covenant with God, twice in the mountains above Shechem. And then all of those things were good things. These were all making covenant, reestablishing covenant, all things that blessed the land, that blessed the area, that blessed the Israelites' relationship with God. So how had it now become Samaria, a place where the Samaritans lived, these people who were despised by the Lord, not despised by the Lord, despised by the Jews? How had that actually happened? Well, it was also where Rehoboam, who was David's grandson, was responsible for Israel being torn in two and divided into 2 different nations, Judah, the northern tribes, and the southern tribes. So remember the whole story, because Solomon, and because he failed basically towards the end of his life, he married hundreds of women and had hundreds of concubines, and they were all foreign women, and they all worshipped false gods, and Solomon allowed them to persuade him to worship their false gods, and he broke his covenant with God. And the consequences of his actions were that whereas God had promised David that his line would always be, that the kingship of Israel would always be in the line of David, Solomon's actions actually broke that covenant. And remember, it was prophesied that Israel would be divided in 2. And that is exactly what happened when Rehoboam, who was David's grandson, Solomon's son, David's grandson, he was responsible for Israel being divided in 2. And it was that in that area, in that place. And so the kingship was torn away from the line of David. The kingship was torn away from the line of David because Israel was divided in two separate spaces, 2 separate kings. And so no longer was it the Israel that God had originally envisioned, that God had promised David, he made a covenant with David, would always have a king in his lineage. And this happened all in that same area, all in that same area. It was also the space, Shechem, if you read the story of the rape of Dinah, Jacob's daughter, and then when Simeon and Levi, when Jacob, then the prince of Shechem, remember, he raped Dinah, and then he wanted to marry, he fell in love with her and he wanted to marry her, and Jacob agreed that they could get married, and but Simeon and Levi were so up in arms about what had happened to Dinah that they convinced, or Jacob made the arrangement with the men of Shechem that the prince of Shechem could only marry Dinah if all the men were circumcised in Shechem. And Simeon and Levi waited for all the men to have been circumcised when they were all at their weakest. And then they went in and they slaughtered every man in Shechem. Simeon and Levi, they slaughtered every man in Shechem. And whilst we could possibly think that that is understandable from the perspective of what happened to Dinah, and it's an horrific story, so we won't go into that right now, but the point was that Jacob had made a covenant with the men of Shechem, with the prince of Shechem. And by all the men being circumcised, they had entered into that covenant. And so what Simeon and Levi did was they broke that covenant. So you can see that this area, Sekar and Shechem, was steeped in history, steeped in covenants made and covenants broken. More covenants that had been made, but then twice where covenants had been broken in this space. And the end result of broken covenant was that it was a place occupied by the Samaritans that the Jewish people wouldn't even enter into, even though a lot of their history was in that place, on that land. They wouldn't even enter into it because of what had happened, and the covenant had been broken so incredibly, devastatingly deeply. So Jesus has to go through Samaria, not just to minister to the woman at the well, but to heal the covenant, to heal what had happened in the land over centuries and centuries, over all the time, to heal that broken covenant that had happened in that space. So there's so much more to the story than just the woman at the well. So the name Shechem means shoulder. And shoulder to the Hebrews signified a shoulder, particularly the right shoulder, signified to the Hebrews responsibility and keys of authority. And in ancient Middle Eastern times, what the Hebrews would do is if somebody in authority wanted to give another individual authority, they would lay their keys on the right shoulder of the person to whom they were imparting authority. So in ancient Hebrew times, so that it all makes a whole lot more sense, doesn't it? That's a verse about the keys of David. In ancient Middle Eastern times, the Hebrew people, if someone was in authority and they wanted to give another individual authority, they would lay their keys on the right shoulder. The right shoulder represented responsibility, and it represented the keys of authority. And that is what the name Shechem represented to the Jewish people: authority. And then Sychar, the name Sychar, the place where Jesus actually was meeting the woman at the well, the name Sychar means drink. It means drink. But it can also mean, because I've explained to you many times with the Hebrew language how words have more connotations around just their direct meaning, and then they have roots and they have connotations and they have context, etc., etc. So the name Sychar means drink. It also means alcohol, wages, sycamore, cupbearer. Remember that one, cupbearer. It also has connotations of laugh and lintel. So I want you to remember cupbearer, and I want you to remember lintel, because those two things combined make this well at Sychar, in the area or close to the place of Shechem. It makes this a threshold place. If you think of all the covenants that had taken place there and the covenants that had been broken there, it is a threshold space, a threshold place. And Jesus has come to this threshold place to heal the land, to restore the covenant. And through all of that, he heals this woman at the well. And she becomes, which I'm going to explain to you as we go through the story, she becomes a cupbearer to the king and the very first evangelist. She becomes a cupbearer to the king and the very first evangelist. So the other, sorry, I'm just looking at my notes because I have so much here that I've actually said. The last time in the Old Testament that we hear about the Samaritans is in the book of Nehemiah. Now, what happened with Ezra and Nehemiah? When Ezra and Nehemiah, remember, they were the prophets who went back to Judah when after the exile. They took a remnant of people and they went back, and they Ezra reestablished the temple, and Nehemiah rebuilt the walls of Jerusalem. Remember that? But what happened with Ezra and Nehemiah? If you've ever read the book of Ezra or the book of Nehemiah, you will know that when they reread the law of God, the Israelites had intermarried. They'd been in exile for years. They had intermarried. They had married women from other nations, from other spaces and places. So a lot of the Israelite men had foreign wives. And what happened with Ezra and Nehemiah is when they read, the word of the Lord, and they realized that they were only supposed to intermarry between themselves, then Ezra particularly, made a decision that all the men, in order to purify the Israelites, in order to purify their line, their genealogy, etc., that all the men had to divorce and get rid of their foreign wives and children. Now, if you actually go and read that, you will notice that it doesn't say in the text specifically that God told Ezra that. It doesn't say that. It doesn't say that. Because if we look at the amount of times in the Bible that God used foreign women, there are foreign women in the lineage of Jesus. It is never, if you look at the amount of times God told the Israelites to look after the widows and the orphans, God would never have condoned all of these foreign wives and children being cast off and sent away. Because in those days, in the ancient Middle East, a woman without a husband, children without a father, children were not important in ancient biblical times, in the ancient Middle Eastern times. Children were not important. They weren't seen, not the way we see our children today. And a woman without a husband or a father to look after her and protect her was nothing. Absolutely nothing. They would be left to starve to death. They would be cast out. Nobody would even blink an eye or care at all what happened to them. If they had nobody to look after them, nobody to provide for them, it wouldn't matter if they had children. Children were much more unimportant in those days than they were. People wanted to have children, but while the children were little and growing up, they weren't particularly important. They often weren't treated very well in ancient Middle Eastern times. That's one of the reasons why people found it people were able to sacrifice their firstborn babies to Moloch. They didn't see children and babies and all of that kind of thing with the same way that we see them today. And we have to put our minds in ancient Middle Eastern context when we read these stories and understand. So here in Jerusalem, the remnant have returned, the exiles are back, they've rebuilt the temple, they've rebuilt the walls of Jerusalem, but in doing so, they have just cast off. The men have divorced and cast off their foreign wives and children. And we read that and we just assume that it's correct, because that's what they should have done because it was Ezra, because it was Nehemiah. But actually, it does not say in the text that God specifically told them to do that. And nobody knows what happened to those foreign women and children after they were cast off, where they went. Could they go back to their original land? It's just they divorced them, and that was that. And so Jesus is also healing that part of history. When Jesus comes, and many of those foreign women who were divorced by the Jewish men were Samaritans. Many of them were Samaritans. So there was an extra division added to this whole Jew-Samaritan divide. So when Jesus came and ministered to the Samaritan woman at the well, that was another part of the history of the Israelites, that he was reestablishing, reaffirming, he was recovenanting with the Samaritan people and undoing centuries of hurt from what had happened all of those years before. And it was with a woman. It was a threshold event that happened with a woman. Absolutely amazing. Absolutely amazing. I hope that all of that interested all of you in the same way that it interested me, because the comments are very slow in coming. I'm trusting that that's because you're all making notes or something. But I mean, this just fascinates me. This, what Jesus, the layers of meaning in the things that Jesus did in these stories that we read so glibly and so flippantly in the Bible, just amaze me every single time. So please comment if I've lost you, if I've left you behind, if you're not interested in all of this, or if you're just making notes. Okay, Jen, making notes. If you can't comment because you're making notes, I'm quite happy with that. So now Jesus has rested from his journey by the well, and it was then about the sixth hour, about noon. Now, many of us, I'm sure, have heard this preached, that the Samaritan woman was drawing water at noon because she was some sort of pariah amongst her peers. And you might have heard it preached that most women would draw water in the cool of the morning, and the Samaritan woman went on her own to draw water at noon because nobody else would talk to her. You might have heard that preached before. There is actually no historical evidence that that is true. There is no historical evidence that the women only drew water in the morning. In fact, in other places in the Bible, who was it? Who went to draw water when this Rebecca, she was drawing water. It was either Rebecca or Rachel, I can't think now, drew water, was drawing water at noon. So there is no historical, theological evidence that women only drew water in the morning, and that the Samaritan woman was drawing water at noon because she was some sort of pariah amongst the women in the village. There's actually no historical evidence for that. That is something that I think has just been perpetuated, a story that has been perpetuated because people have wondered why she was drawing water by herself and why she was drawing water at the hottest part of the day. But people went to draw water when and when they needed it, and women in those times were badly treated. They were badly treated. When it tells us that the Samaritan woman, when Jesus recognizes that she's been divorced, she's had 5 husbands or whatever, and we'll get to that. But when he says, she's had 5 husbands, I've heard so many sermons preached about how she was so sinful and she was this loose woman because she'd had 5 husbands and been divorced 5 times, and she was living with someone who wasn't her husband. Well, in those days, it was practically impossible for a woman to get divorced. Divorce could only come from the husband. So, and it doesn't actually tell us that her 5 husbands had divorced her. It just tells us that she had 5 husbands. But it doesn't tell us that they divorced her. They could have died. She could have been a widow 5 times over. We don't actually know. But so many sermons have been preached around how sinful the Samaritan woman was because she'd been married 5 times and now she was living with a man who wasn't her husband. And again, nothing in the text explains who the man was who wasn't her husband. It could have been a brother, it could have been a relative, it could have been anybody. But we'll get to that. Because that part just really freaks me out. Anyway, so here we go. Here's the Samaritan woman drawing water from Jacob's well at noon. Can we just put away the thought that it's because she was a pariah in the village? Okay, the women, as I was saying earlier, were badly treated in those days, and they had no rights. And so the women there in Samaria would have understood why she'd had 5 husbands and was living with someone who wasn't her husband. They would have completely understood that. So presently, when a woman of Samaria came along to draw water, Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink." For his disciples had gone off into the town to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, "How is it that you, being a Jew, ask me, a Samaritan, and a woman for a drink, for the Jews have nothing to do with the Samaritans. Some translations of this verse, John chapter 4, verse 9, some translations actually speak of associate. How is it that you want to associate, or the Jews and the Jews do not associate with the Samaritans? They actually use the word associate, and that word associate, that Greek word for associate, actually carries the context of not sharing cups or utensils. Now, Jesus didn't have a cup to drink water out of. Jacob's well was 30 feet deep. He would have had to use a cup given to him by the woman at the well, by the Samaritan woman. And it's not just that the Jewish people had nothing to do with the Samaritans, but like I mentioned earlier, they wouldn't even drink from the same cup as the Samaritans. They wouldn't use utensils that the Samaritans had used, and that was how deep the disassociation went. Plus, Jesus was a single man in conversation with a woman with nobody else around, and that was also forbidden. Men didn't converse with strange women. Men didn't converse with foreign women, Jewish men, law-abiding, religious Jewish men. Didn't converse with foreign women, didn't converse with strange women, and particularly if you were a single Jewish man. So all of those things, and they certainly didn't share cups or utensils. But Jesus is in the position where if the Samaritan woman has to give him a drink, he's going to have to use her cup because he doesn't have one. So she says to him, she asks him that question. And then in verse 10, Jesus answers her, "If you had only known and had recognized God's gift and who this is that is saying to you, 'Give me a drink,' you would have asked him instead, and he would have given you living water." So Jesus brings up the fact that now that he carries the living water. And the Samaritan woman doesn't completely understand what he's talking about. So in verse 11, she says to him, "Sir, you have nothing to draw with, no drawing bucket, and the well is deep. How then can you provide living water? Where do you get your living water?" Because for her, she's still speaking about the natural water. She's still speaking about the water that comes out the well. She doesn't fully appreciate that Jesus is speaking about himself as living water. And then she says, "Are you greater than and superior to our ancestor Jacob, who gave us this well and who used to drink from it himself and his sons and his cattle also?" So now we know that the Samaritans, Jacob was their ancestor. So the division of the tribes of Israel, the split in those two kingdoms, the split that created these two kingdoms was so deep, so divisive, so devastating, that even though they had the same ancestor, they still refused to have anything to do with each other. And Jesus is there now to heal this once and for all. Doesn't mean that they then became big buddies afterwards, that the Jews and the Samaritans became friends and everything was fine after that. But he was healing things in the spirit. He was healing things on the land. So Jesus answered her in verse 13, "All who drink of this water will be thirsty again. But whoever takes a drink of the water that I will give him shall never, no, never be thirsty anymore. But the water that I will give him shall become a spring of water welling up, flowing, bubbling continually within him unto eternal life." And the woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water, so that I may never get thirsty, nor have to come continually all the way here to draw." So she wants what he's offering. She's saying yes to Jesus. But she still doesn't know exactly who he is. And she still doesn't understand his concept of the living water. But she's saying yes. She's saying yes. And so the woman at the well, and we're going to see as we go through the story, because I'm going to have to end off now and we're going to have to continue on Wednesday. But the woman at the well was not just a Samaritan woman that Jesus engaged with and healed from her sorrowful past and all of that kind of thing. And she wasn't even just the first evangelist. We celebrate the fact. We celebrate the fact that she was the first evangelist. But she was also cupbearer to a king. And scholars and theologians call her a kingmaker, because in order to crown a king in ancient Middle Eastern times, you needed water and anointing oil. But and they had water there was no anointing oil. However, it could happen even just through words, through speaking words about living water and anointing oil. You could crown somebody a king. And so historians have said that the woman at the well giving Jesus the water, and the conversation that they had, which we will go through more of it on Wednesday, the conversation that they had was sufficient for her to recognize him. Not only did the Samaritans in that town land up recognizing him as the Messiah, but she actually was recognizing him, knowingly or unknowingly, as a king. She was a kingmaker. She was a kingmaker, she was a cupbearer, and she was the first evangelist. The conversation that Jesus had with the woman at the well is the longest conversation between Jesus and another person recorded in the Gospels. The conversation that Jesus had with the woman at the well is the longest conversation between Jesus and another person recorded in the Gospels. Doesn't it blow your mind? Don't you think that there is so much more to this story? And do you realize how knowingly or unknowingly, intentionally or unintentionally, how within the church space, the story of the woman at the well has been reduced to a story of a sinful woman who was given grace and mercy by Jesus. A sinful foreign woman who was given grace and mercy by Jesus, and the first time that we hear Jesus speak about the living water. The story, and do you not think, possibly, just maybe, that it's because she was a woman, and because there are so many people in church history, and now even in the church that we are all a part of today, so many people who struggle with the fact that it was a woman that Jesus used here. And so they will acknowledge that she was the first evangelist, because they can't deny that. It's in the text. It is in the text. The disciples weren't the first evangelist. The people who followed Jesus weren't the first evangelists. She was the first evangelist, and it's in the text. You can't get away from that. But the acknowledgement that she was a kingmaker, that she was a cupbearer, that once again God used a foreign woman in the story of Jesus, is just disregarded so many times by people, particularly men, who preach on the story of the woman at the well. Do you know that Jesus doesn't say to her at all in that story, and we'll go through it, we'll go further on Wednesday. He doesn't once say to her, go forth and sin no more, like he said to other people. He doesn't tell her that she has to repent. He doesn't say anything in his conversation with her. He doesn't say anything to her about personal sin. Nothing about personal sin. And yet she is labeled or named as this loose woman who had all of these husbands and was living with a man who wasn't her husband and needed the grace and the mercy of God. And how many times has that sermon been preached at women? Even though you're a woman, and you might have made all these mistakes and done these terrible things, you're still entitled to grace and mercy, because look at the woman at the well. No, not once does Jesus say to her, you need to repent. Go and sin no more, like he did to other women and to other people. No. There is so much more to the story than we have been taught. Jesus was doing so much more in this space than we have ever recognized. It is so much bigger. What Jesus was doing there was so much bigger than the way that we have traditionally read the story and had the story preached at us. And it's time that we start recognizing the power behind the story of the woman at the well, and actually correcting the people's perceptions of her and the way she has been labeled for years and years and years in church history. So there isn't time for any more. I'm going to end there, otherwise I'm going to start getting into other things and then we're going to land up just ending in the middle of nowhere. But I hope that this has blessed you as much as it has blessed me. I hope that you, as a woman particularly, receive the healing available in this correct, theologically, biblically, historically correct teaching on the woman at the well. And we are going to delve into more of her story on Wednesday. On Wednesday morning, Wisdom Wednesdays at 7 a.m., we are going to delve more into her story. So bless you all. I hope you have a wonderful Monday and you are blessed and peaceful, and God pours his tangible love over you in absolute abundance. And I will see you all on Wednesday morning at 7 a.m. Love you.